I had the privilege of working with HSI and retiring back in 2019. I spent the majority of my career working in Latin America and actually lived and worked in Central America for 13 years of my career, and got to witness and experience this whole migration growth, not only with the migrants from Central America, but the migrants, the SIAs, as we discussed, those from extracontinental migrants that are coming into the continent. And, those routes, Jim touched on them and how we looked at them and stuff, but, September 11th, cause and effect, and the way that airport security came about, and how not only the United States, but many of our partners around the world started looking at flight lists before they would come in and making sure you had the visas and the proper things come in, really limited access to the United States and people that wanted to come here that weren't from this continent. So how do you get here, right? And how do you get into the United States? And back in 2011 in Panama, there's in the southern part of Panama, or the eastern part of Panama with Colombia, there's a jungle called the Darien Gap. It's about 10,000 square miles in size. And it's very mountainous, very treacherous, snakes, jungle, cliffs. There's only so many ways you can work your way through there. And prior to that time, we focused a lot on the narcotic flows that were coming in the United States and those traditional threats at airports and things like that. We really didn't, if you would have come and asked all of us, would people walk through that jungle to get to the United States? The answer would have been no, you're crazy. I mean, it would be insane. It takes anywhere from 7 to 10 days. And Todd touches on those things in the books, and I think he did a really good job at that. But what you look at that and is like, so in 2011, there was 4 individuals from Pakistan that walked through that jungle. And this is back in 2000, as I mentioned, in 2011, we looked at it, we said, what's going on here? Why would you do that? And so we started to pay attention to it, and started to build programs. And we use programs that we use traditionally in other investigations, right? And how we learned a long way. If our partners are stronger, if they have the ability to investigate and to take care of their piece of the pie and make themselves safer, ultimately that makes us safer in the United States. That filter process, or those trip lines, as Todd mentioned, you want to develop those things and look at them. So we started, in HSI, we started a biometric program that would take fingerprints and photos and biographical data, and we'd be able to upload them and run them against U.S. databases. And if there was a hitter in there, we could share that with our partners, whether that was in Panama, in Costa Rica, El Salvador, Colombia, and give them the information. And what we found, at the most part, most countries would make the right decision, right? If that individual, whether they were a drug smuggler or a KST, a known or suspected terrorist, and then we could act upon that and work with them and determine, what was their purpose of traveling. And there was a case that was highlighted, and it's open source. It was an individual, Ibrahim Korchin, I think Todd mentions him in his book, that was actually interdicted in Costa Rica. And that program in Costa Rica, we'd only been working about 2 weeks. They'd trained 2 weeks prior to that. And so it was just an amazing example of what our host government counterparts could do, but really the needle in the haystack, right? As it's been mentioned, both Jim and Norman both mentioned that, is you have the flow of all these migrants coming. And, what are those numbers of migrants? We looked at the Darien Gap as kind of a choke point and a gauge, because once you get through there, you can spread out. You get on buses, there's different routes you can take, and how you get there. And we started looking at those numbers, and I think it was back in 2011, we were less than 1,000 people, right? And over the years, we watched it. Ultimately, I think in the last few years, there are between 20 and 30,000 migrants are walking through a 10,000 square mile jungle. Sometimes you ask, so why? And a lot of those people, and we found most of those people that take this journey, the extracontinentals, if they're not from Brazil or Cuba or some of the other places that are within the hemisphere, are males, 18 to 24, 25 years old. What is their purpose of coming to the United States? A lot of them to find a better life, but there's no tests that you can use out there to say, has this person been radicalized? What is their purpose? What is their purpose for this journey? Is it really to make a better life for themselves, the American dream, or is it to do harm to the United States? And there's only so much that we have in our database and so many things that can be run and checked. So teaching them, as Norman mentioned, an interview process and how you interview them, what questions you ask, none of them brought passports, but everyone had a cell phone. And you would ask them, well, what happened to your passport? Well, I lost my passport in the river. They have their cell phone. There was literally in the jungle where they'd walk out of the jungle. I'd been there. There was an indigenous man under a thatched roof. We called them bohíos, with a little Honda generator, charging everyone $1 to charge their phones, to recharge their phones with electricity. And you see, and that was one of the other unique things that we saw is that how the market, Jim touched a little bit on this, and I wanted to go back to that. This is all narco territory. And what we found was for years, we all said a drug dealer would not move a terrorist because it's bad for business. Well, we found out that's not true. Because one, a terrorist doesn't tell you that he's a terrorist. And two, drug dealers don't vet people and say, well, is this really a bad guy or a good guy? All they care about is, moving people. So what the narcos would do is they would charge a tax. And the actual human smuggling organizations were very disconnected. Like Jim did a great job of explaining that, and how you'd have a bus driver and everyone else is involved, almost an informal process. We even found the indigenous people were setting up we call them bed and breakfasts in the jungle, but it's not a bed and breakfast that any of you would think about going to, taking a family member to. It was just a place where you could get out from in the rain and they'd have some rice and cook, you pay a fee, it was a stopping point, and you move on your way. But the narcos would change tax. We actually had there was a big cartel that worked the Caribbean side of Colombia, and some migrants people started offering boat services. It's a lot quicker to take a boat from Turbo, Colombia, and come around to the north coast of Panama than do that treacherous walk. If you had a little bit more money, you could coordinate it, you could do it. And some deaths occurred with some migrants, and then the narcos shut that off to moving migrants through because it brought unwanted attention to that area. So they actually used the migrant flows to, help them in their drug business. And so we saw all these things, and as they move up into Central America, and they mix into the regular migrant flows. You looked at it and said, what are the similarities, right? The routes are similar. The differences are they don't speak the language. They're could be coming possibly for different reasons. And those trying to identify those on the way and do those trigger points as they move up. One of the amazing things that we saw that the coyotes got to do, they actually used the governments to move migrants. So I'll wrap up real quick. And the amazing thing is that, for example, you come out of the Darien, you've got jungle foot, you've got bug bites, you've hurt yourself. So the coyotes would have the migrants turn themselves into the government, who would provide play, food, and shelter. They would do a process, release them, then they'd get on a bus and go to the next country in Costa Rica and turn themselves in there as well. Each one of the Panama called the controlled flows, but the actual coyotes were using the government to move the migrants up through the chain. I always call it the steps. Once you're in Mexico, you're on the back porch of the United States, and Central America is basically the steps to the back porch. And it changes, and it was an amazing process to watch. The key is finding that needle in the haystack. Thank you.